Well, after roaming space for 12 years and chasing a comet, well, while those years ticked past, the Rosetta spacecraft has ended its mission, deliberately crashing into said comet. During its lifetime, if you will, the Rosetta traveled more than 3.5 million miles of space, collecting a treasure trove of information for scientists. CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood, good enough to join us now from Merritt Island, Florida. And, well, Bill, if you could then walk us through just how the dearly departed Rosetta's mission drew to a close this morning.
Yeah, you know, it was really something. This is one of the most successful missions Europe's ever launched. A truly ambitious thing. NASA's never done anything quite like this. As you said, it took 10 years just to get to this comet. Then they spent 2 years flying in formation with it. They dropped a little lander to the surface. And again, over this past 2 years, this spacecraft has been slowly orbiting this very small comet as it went in toward the sun and is now heading back out. And of course, that's the reason they decided to end the mission with today's crash landing. It's getting too far from the sun for its solar arrays to generate enough power to keep the science going. So they figured, you know, what's more fitting than to put it down on the surface of this comet where it can join the lander it dropped off a couple of years ago, and it'll be there for all practical purposes forever.
And so it goes. Rosetta, I feel like we never knew you. Especially in those 2 years then that it spent flying in formation with the comet, which is just a remarkable thing to attempt to conceive of. What information did it provide?
Well, it's really rewritten the textbooks about comets. You know, they always thought that comets were left over from the formation of the solar system 4.5 billion years ago. In other words, remnants of the material that was there that coalesced to form the sun and the planets. But no one's been quite sure about how that happened. What the Rosetta mission has shown is that this comet appears to be made up primarily of spherical objects. They call them goose eggs or dinosaur eggs, kind of jokingly. But when they look down into some of the pits that show down into the interior of the comet, you see countless numbers of these things on the walls. And it appears that these are the small bodies that came together in the very beginning that ended up collecting together under their mutual gravity to form the comet. And then larger bodies like comets and asteroids then coalesce to form the planet. So it's kind of like this is an intermediate step on the road to building planets. And so it's helping fill in the blanks about how all that happened back in the distant past.
It was a remarkable piece of video we just played as you provided that very thorough explanation, Bill. I don't know that I'll ever see something quite so discordant in my life. I want to ask you about that lander specifically again. It made a landing on the comet in 2014. You mentioned essentially off it will go ad infinitum as the comet in fact now makes its way to that yellow dwarf in the sky?
Well, the lander you're referring to is known as Philae, and it actually touched down on the surface of the comet back in November 2014, as you say. It was supposed to anchor itself down and conduct some science, but it didn't. It bounced off. It's been about 2 hours bouncing, in fact, in the very feeble gravity of this comet, and ended up on its side in a big jumble of rocks, heavily shadowed, and it died shortly thereafter. They didn't really know where the Philae lander even ended up until this past August. They finally spotted it with the cameras on Rosetta, exactly where, you know, as they assumed it would be, on its side, one of its legs sticking up, very kind of sad and forlorn, sticking there against the side of a cliff. And now the Rosetta lander is in, the Rosetta orbiter, I should say, has ended its mission about a half a mile away from where the Philae lander came to rest. So they're both there. They'll stay there indefinitely, and you know, who knows how long some future civilization might get there and find these guys.
Hanging out in that gravity, however anemic. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Rosetta. Thank you for the decade plus of service, I suppose. Bill Harwood, as always, we appreciate the time.
My pleasure.